Why not?
Indeed.
Indeed. What day is it, Justin?
Tuesday.
Is it a Tuesday?
No, it's a Wednesday.
It is a Wednesday, isn't it?
And it's Megan's birthday.
Ah, happy birthday, Megan.
Yes. She's 20 years old today.
Okay. I didn't mean to laugh quite that hard.
You weren't laughing at that. You were
yeah,
laughing
well,
at
I just...
I got nothing. No,
So, yeah. Well, happy birthday to
she's
Megan.
still in her 30s.
Good for her.
That's what I can tell you.
That's fair enough.
And
I will let it go with
lords
that.
it over me.
We'll let it go with
So,
that.
yes.
Yes.
She still got me.
Yeah?
Yep. I'm still the old guy. She's still the young spring chicken. But yes, it's her birthday today.
Well, neat.
I hope she has a good one.
Yes. Any special plans that you can share?
Today, specifically, no. She's got some plans as far as having a chill day and
Good for her.
things, and I'm gonna make some cookies for her.
Oh, wow.
That was one of her requests. So, also I made a table for our deck, kind of an
neat.
outdoor table, and kind of sort of as a birthday present for her.
Oh, neat.
Yeah,
Neat. What kind of cookies you can make?
butterscotch cookies.
Butterscotch
Yeah.
cookies.
That's right.
Huh.
That's what she requested. I'm happy to oblige.
Nice.
Yeah.
Welcome to How I See It with me, Mark Pratt, and
Justin Sternberg. This is a podcast that works to counter cultural polarization through thoughtful conversations. So
wow.
you can send me some good vibes. I can make some good cookies.
There you go. There you go. I'm sure you can make some good cookies.
I think I can.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. We're when you think about sending vibes,
I knew I was gonna get caught with that one.
where do the vibes come from? How do you send a vibe?
You have to make your brain vibrate
Yeah.
towards somebody.
Okay.
Yeah.
In a positive direction.
That's right.
How can
don't want bad vibes.
How can vibration be positive or negative? Aren't they like a
Good
sine wave?
vibrations. Haven't you heard the song?
Yeah.
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 The Beach Boys.
But
You
that
should
yeah.
ask them about it.
I just I was asking you.
I don't think I have a good answer. I think
Okay.
it's just positive feelings
'Cause it's-
towards someone.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I think about it, in the 70s, that was the 70s, right? When the Beach Boys were doing
Probably.
good vibrations.
That sounds
And
right.
it's funny how it just seems like it has come back.
yeah.
Or it never went
vibes.
away. It's vibes
Yeah.
is kind of
Yeah.
a popular
Yeah, it's kind of you're right. It's
Yeah.
back in the
vogue.
No, what's the word we used to say that I looked up?
The Zeitgeist?
Yeah.
Zeitgeist? Zeitgeist?
Beetlejuice.
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah, zeitgeist. It's back in the zeitgeist.
Understood.
Yeah, that is interesting.
Yeah.
I think it's a way to not be spiritual,
Oh.
but still be spiritual towards someone, if that makes sense.
It's a
It's like a good
blessings towards you type
yes,
thing.
exactly, but without having to say I'm praying for you or
Okay.
that kind of thing, or like you said, blessings.
Sending good vibes your way.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Yeah.
It's typically a very
Just-
nice thing to hear.
Just
in
trying
terms
to
of-
catch up. Yeah.
Yeah.
Making sure I was using it correctly in
That's right.
terminology. If I should choose.
You can use that in your counseling sessions.
Oh, yeah.
All right, let's start off with some good vibes.
That sounds real nebulous to me.
It is. That's the point, I think.
There you go.
There's
It's
no
definitely
commitment
no
required,
offensive.
yeah.
It's not offensive.
That's right.
Yeah.
Unless
Yeah.
you're Mark.
No, I wasn't offended.
Just
I was
kidding.
just, I was thinking about that. Yeah. As far as a practical
Yeah.
sense.
I thought it would be weird to ask for prayer that I made good cookies. So,
Oh, yeah.
and also that when people hear this, the cookies will have been gone.
No, that's true. Yeah.
So-
It's like, it's
So
nothing.
all I can
nothing's a
rely on
surprise.
is your good vibes at that point. Prayers aren't going to help.
Can you send vibes in reverse? I mean,
Maybe,
over
yeah.
time,
Maybe,
I
yeah.
know prayers, of course.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. That blessing song comes to mind. Lord bless you, keep you, make his face
Yes.
shine. It's
Yeah. That's
and
future,
give-
though.
Yeah. but
But
that
I
becomes part of legacy
Mm-hmm.
from my perspective.
Sure.
But yeah,
I think you can pray past prayers, right? Don't you think? No, that probably won't get answered, but it doesn't mean you can't pray it.
prayers that affect
Yeah,
history?
retroactive.
History?
Yeah.
I wouldn't see why not.
I mean, Lazarus comes to mind, right?
Sure.
Not that they were praying he would come back to life. They should have. They would have had their prayers answered.
There you go.
Keep that in mind.
Yeah, interesting. Because we can only pray. I was thinking God would know the beginning from the end.
That's right.
But if we're praying about it, it's either going to happen or it's something that has happened.
Yeah. Well, the thing is,
But God knows.
arguably, God operates outside of time.
Right.
Right? So there's no difference between asking for something in the future and the past for him.
Sure.
I mean, that breaks our brain, right? But
I gotcha.
it's not so linear for him.
Exactly. Yeah.
But,
So he would know the prayers that we're praying in the future about our past.
right.
Yeah. So he could still answer our future prayers about our past.
He could.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because he would know that they were going to be uttered at some time.
That's right.
Yeah.
The thing is, if he he knew we were going to ask the prayer, and he said, I guess I'll answer that, then he would go back in time, and then he would fix it.
No, it's not that he goes back in time.
Yeah,
he just takes it into
I'm
account.
just,
Come on now.
Goes back in time, changes it, and then we don't ask the prayer anymore because it never happened.
Oh.
Right? It's
No,
an inception.
That's not how I see it.
That's not how you see it. How do you see it?
I see it that he knows our prayers for the future,
Yeah.
and he takes them into account,
Yeah.
even in the past, even what is my past
It's
now.
part of the plan, the ultimate plan.
The ultimate plan.
Yeah.
That's, yeah.
I agree. I was going to, say that too.
You were going to say that too.
Well,
but you chose to say what you said in the past. This should be a time warp podcast.
it should.
Yes. It's past, present, and future.
That's right. So now what you need to do is pause it and then fast forward to the end and listen.
Well,
come back.
That's right. But it's interesting. I was thinking about how that ties into our topic, because I think as we think about our topic for the day, old versus new comes to mind, because I think, things do tend to get like vibes.
Yeah.
Things do tend to become popular again.
Yeah.
Like bell bottoms.
Right.
Skinny jeans will come back eventually if they're, still around type thing, But I think things get recycled.
Yeah. Because history repeats itself.
History repeats itself. Yeah.
Oh, you hear those birds?
I do hear those birds.
Very amplified. I hope you like birds. If you're listening.
Because it's a nice cool morning and the windows are open.
That's right.
And yeah.
And that bird is happy, and we wouldn't want to stop that. So.
That's right.
Yeah, old versus new. History repeats itself. I feel like, man, that one quote you have, or the thing you talk about, where the weak man.
Oh yeah.
Is. You say.
The bad times.
Yes.
Make strong men. Strong men make good times. Good times make weak men. Weak men make bad times. Yes.
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 Just good stuff.
There you go.
And that's history repeating itself, essentially, and what was shunned by one generation starts to look appealing again.
Yes.
Because you can see that pattern would have impact that, right? Like,
yes.
Things aren't working the way they are. Therefore, we need something shiny and new.
Yep.
If you're in bad times, or if you're in good times, you're about protectionism and keep what we got.
Sure.
Even if it's not exactly right. But yeah.
Right.
But yeah, I agree. That's a good point about old and new. And
yeah.
so what are we talking about?
So when you think about that, I'm just see what other than that, what cycles come to mind? What do you think of that's something else? Can you think of something else off the top of your head? I mean, you can go to the topic, of course, but.
Well, I wouldn't necessarily think of that topic because both of those concepts are fairly new in terms of what we call them, but maybe those same systems existed previously.
Well, I think, and what we're talking about is capitalism and socialism. We'll
if you hadn't guessed.
Prolong. Yeah, as if you could. No offense to anyone else out there. It's a little low. But but I think about that in socialism's been around.
Yeah.
It's not necessarily we've been able to see a cycle.
Yeah.
In what has been socialism. I think of, socialism in a lot of ways as, similar to Marxism, in that era, if you will. And yet I think it has become a more popular perspective as we think about, okay, I think, no one has to, you don't have to pay for your college education, that kind of thing. I think, that's socialistic in its thinking. Mm-hmm. And yet I recognize how, from my perspective, socialism kind of failed under Marxism in that era.
Which was kind of the extreme version of socialism, right? Like, by extreme, I mean most ideal kind of mindset of how it should work.
Sure. But I think most things are presented in their most ideal.
I say that, well, just kind of tipping my hand a little bit in the sense that I think it'll be interesting to talk about the democratic socialism thing that's going on right now.
Okay.
But we don't have to jump there right now. But I feel like that is a different flavor, a modified flavor of the original,
Yes, I hear where you're coming from.
Extra intense version, right?
Okay, I see what you're saying. So it's it's a modified version.
Yeah.
Because we recognize
like a half calf.
Okay. So we saw that the Marxist socialism didn't work, so we're trying to reinvent it.
Yeah.
In such a way that it will work now.
Yeah. Yeah. So what's interesting the reason is because there are a pretty large contingency of people who don't believe capitalism is working either.
Gotcha.
But, it depends on your definition of working, and I think that's really where the polarization comes, right? Like one side will say that side's not working, so we need this side, and the other side, well, that side's not working, and this one is or whatever, and
okay.
And I think it just
can you explain that a little more? Because when you said one side's not working, I was thinking I automatically went to work, as in people are working like a socialism dynamic.
Yeah.
But you were talking more about capitalism. In other words, a model that's not working.
Yeah.
Versus an individual that's not working.
Well, this is something. Yes, right. So,
okay.
I mean, that's a good point, and we should address that. I would say a lot of people far from the ideals of socialism would say socialism really at its core is just about you not having to work, and that's dumb.
I got you. Okay.
And that's a very polarized viewpoint of it.
No, I hear you.
But one thing I've been hearing a lot from people who have an appeal towards the democratic socialism or more, is this idea that you work hard, but also there are some things that are just a right for you, that are given as a right, because that's what we believe in. Socially together is a right. So education would be one, and healthcare is the two most common things I've heard.
Sure. No, I hear you.
You can agree or disagree, but I'm saying that's kind of the thing. So there's not this idea that you shouldn't work. It's that your work shouldn't have to account for those things.
Sure.
And I'm,
because those things should be provided as a right to you, regardless.
Yeah, exactly. Kind of, one of the analogies is like you have this right to roads, right? You can get across town, you can get across the country.
Sure.
Driving on these public roads, they're a right that you have that is given by the government, and it's part of, what you pay taxes for. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
But there's no reason that other than we just agreed together, that's a good thing that you should have a right to. Right.
Huh.
So where do we
I
draw
get-
those lines and say, yeah, but not healthcare or whatever? And I'm not trying to make, here's the thing. I'm not going to try and make a case for anything. I'm just trying to say, I think there's room for the conversation. And like there are countries doing this, right? I think Norway is one.
Okay.
I think where they're a very successful country and they have very high taxes and their healthcare and school, college is
education.
covered. Yeah, education is covered to a degree, right? If you choose to go to a more expensive university or whatever, I think, there's some limits. But they're doing that, and they're a successful country, and it hasn't broken everyone, and that, because that's the thing about socialism, right? Especially Marxism, is just everyone's broke.
Sure.
Like, when I mean
Except
that,
for the
I mean
few
like,
that are in control.
I don't mean money broke. I mean like spirit broke.
Oh, okay.
Does that make sense?
Sure.
It's like, we've talked about this. We're meant to work.
Right.
So
Purpose.
you take away that purpose and say, well, you're going to work, but it's going to be for everybody's good. And it really, man, just sucks the purpose out of each individual's life.
Sure.
You just become a worker bee.
Yeah. I'm curious what this is interesting because that was the first I'd ever thought about roads being a right.
Well, I don't know if that's the right word,
but that's interesting because I can say there's things that I would probably use every day, like a road, I wouldn't necessarily consider it my right, because in some ways I would automatically go to the fact, well, no, those roads are there, yes, but I also have to license a vehicle. I have to, do these things. I have to pay for these things.
Yeah.
And granted, I can walk that road without paying anything for it, so I'd still have the access to it. But yeah,
well, I mean, roads is just one thing, but just go through the plethora of things that is provided through our taxes and through the government.
No, I hear you.
Like the list is very long.
Yeah.
So that's kind of what I'm saying. It's like, why did we draw those lines?
Right. And I guess that's where I think some of the polarization also comes from, is because we want to assign, I would say, those in the socialistic dynamic would say this is a right. This should be a right. And it's like, okay, why that? And I understand, where you're coming from with healthcare and, and right to education. And there again, I would still, is a college education valuable to everyone, in that process, or, because I think so often it can get so focused. And I think for years it has become so focused on, college education that now we're looking for trades and, people to actually work with their hands type stuff, in such a way that we probably haven't ever experienced before.
Well, I'm not going to say this is for sure true, but if I recall correctly, I feel like European countries have way more trade representation in schools,
Gotcha.
right? In college. So like that, you could choose either path.
Sure.
And have that paid for kind of thing.
I gotcha.
Don't quote me, but I think that's true based on.
Yeah. Justin is not saying he's going to leave. He's anything against the United States and he's moving to Europe tomorrow. He's not saying that.
No.
He's just aware.
Yeah.
Or thinks he is aware of a circumstance.
Right. He just thinks he is aware of things. He thinks he knows that. It's the story of my life. This is how I see it, so I can say whatever I want.
Because he thinks he knows.
That's right.
And that's okay too. So anyways, back to that aspect of when you think about capitalism.
Yeah.
Because it's interesting as we have this discussion, it's like there's people that come to mind, that will talk about, like you're saying, capitalism is just this terrible, nasty thing.
Yeah.
That I have in my, people that I have in my mind. And it's like, when you, and it's that democratic socialism perspective.
Yeah.
But and it's just interesting how that has become more pervasive.
Yeah.
from a cyclical or
Well, we've talked about this too in the past about how the reason polarizing subjects become polarizing is because it becomes easier to push your point of view when you can quickly summarize and vilify the other point of view. So, like, I think any idea that becomes popular enough is going to find an enemy to say, I'm better than that, right? And kind of summarize its problems in this cute little tidy package to say, look how bad it is. So, I mean, I feel like that's just part of this whole, that's why we do these conversations, right? It's like, let's flatten this curve out a little bit, or like, you know, break down some of the problems with summarizing that other side so succinctly, right?
Yeah.
Because it's never that simple.
And I think that's where I'm at, even with the topic this morning. It's like, okay, I'll admit I'm pretty well entrenched, if you can't tell, and on the, that I see capitalism as being a healthy principle, in the process of and as I define that, I'm willing to recognize, yes, parts of capitalism can take advantage of people, and this is how I see it from a pros and cons perspective. I'm willing to recognize capitalism can take advantage of people.
Yes.
And that, if I may, I'll refer to it as that democratic socialization would be the other side of the spectrum that would say, okay, yeah, it's not right to take advantage of people.
Right.
So in this democratic socialism, we won't have, our desire is to do away with, this process where some people are taken advantage of and there are others who are, getting all of the funds or having all of the income, making all the profit. That's where I'm,
Yes.
Because in this democratic socialism, there's the idea that wouldn't happen.
Right. Or less so.
Less so, yes. Yeah. I mean,
again,
granted,
the half-cap version of it, I would say that, where the full-on version would say, it's gone.
Yes.
We're equal. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's where we're creating this continuum, if you will.
Yes. Yeah.
That basically says on one end, nobody has to pay, and yet there just isn't any purpose as we're seeing it. And yet there is this ability that we have in some ways to likely provide for education or for health care. And then again, that dynamic becomes, okay, where do we draw this line?
Yeah.
So now do you have a right to a dog and a cat if you want one? And you just go pick, I'm not trying to simplify, but where do those...
But it's the same argument of the healthcare thing. Like, where do you draw the line? Why do we get roads? It's like, you're right. At some point, we have to draw a line.
Yeah.
A lot of people would argue the line's not far enough right now. And other people would argue it's too far, right? Like, there's certainly a ton of conservatives-minded people that say there's too much government regulation and involvement right now, which I agree with, ironically. Like, it's like, yeah.
So would you say, I mean, I'll call it Obamacare. Would you say that was a part of that democratic socialism where it started to become a process? Okay. We're talking about the same thing.
Yeah. And I believe that there are countries doing healthcare. I mean, maybe childcare too. Healthcare at the government level, and it's successful from the perspective that we have right now with the amount of time they've been doing it, right? So it's not a crazy notion that's like, what are they thinking? It's like, no, it's a viable thing that there are countries that do. That being said, the version that we came up with was just a typical kind of, I want to say, bastardized version of the original intent, right?
Okay.
Because it ended up having to have parents that were also Republicans, right? if going with that analogy. And therefore what came out was kind of this amalgamation of having to please everybody. And it's just, I mean, especially as a rollout, right? Originally.
Sure.
It was the laughing stock of the Republican side of like, look how terrible this website is, doesn't work, da, da, da. That being said, I feel like it probably provides some opportunities where they didn't exist before, and there are many, many, many people in this country that are thankful that that became a thing, right?
Sure.
So at this point, I don't know. I honestly don't even know how to gauge how successful it is. I don't know if it's successful. I don't know if it's doing the job it's supposed to.
Yeah.
I do know it's not doing the job of the intent of the people who, came up with this idea.
Sure.
I also know it's doing more than what the people who didn't want it to happen. You know what I mean? It's
right. Yeah.
So I don't know if that's a great.
Is it a positive?
Good example of democratic socialistic idea that's currently in the works. It feels like it's a very much pared down, watered down version of it, but still brings some merit to some. But again, this is very armchair, very how I see it. And I'd be interested to hear what people who actually know this stuff would say.
Yeah.
On both sides. Like people who say it doesn't work and people...
I was thinking of Mary Beth and that kind of, someone who's been in that health industry, and that dynamic where, you hear, well, you don't have access to, other people and you have to, and I think, I saw it in the community mental health, you have to go through these steps.
Yeah.
You can't have access to that yet because you haven't tried this, and this.
So that's the worst part to me about that Obamacare is it basically takes this democratic socialistic ideal entry point and kind of jams it on top of this terribly broken, wonky system.
Okay.
And said, it's just it's built on a terrible foundation, right? The way insurance has always worked and the way healthcare has always worked in the U.S., which is very capitalistic based, right?
Sure.
And one would totally could and should argue that there are reasons why the U.S. leads some innovation in terms of, whatever, pharmaceutical things and treatment. And it's capitalism's working in that sense.
Right.
Right. But in the other sense, it means normal healthcare is broken.
I hear where you're coming from.
Based on Mary Beth's conversation, all that, the way it's systemized, the way they have certain quotas that they have to meet that don't necessarily align with someone's actual health. Just that whole system.
Yeah.
Go back to, listen to that episode. You'll get an idea of it. It's let's take this system that's this broken and let's add on this other, crazy attachment piece on the top to somehow create a funnel for some people to get into this crazy system.
Sure.
You know what I mean?
I do. I hear where you're coming from because in some ways, if we think about it from a capitalistic perspective, where, if I may say big pharma, that kind of thing is driving the machine.
Yeah.
And, or so it would seem, based on who we've talked to and experienced that kind of thing. Yeah, it does seem as if there is this desire to say, okay, this isn't healthy capitalism, if I may say so.
Yeah.
So we're going to kind of amend that in some ways with this democratic socialism.
Right.
And, we're going to try and shift it.
Yeah.
And that's how
you see why I choose the word I did. It's this version that comes out at the end.
Yes.
It's just so silly. That's a nice way to put it. But you're hitting on this bigger idea that, again, I can speak to a lot of the talking points of the social democracy, whatever they call that. Because a lot of the media I consume is people who are kind of on that side. So I see a lot of the strengths, and I think the arguments are good. But I also grew up in the capitalism argument, and I can make that one, I think, decently. But to me, the more interesting argument is the democratic socialism one. Whether I want our government to switch to that, well, no, I wouldn't want it. I really don't think the kind of government that I think would work could happen in the U.S. the way, you know what I mean?
No, help me understand that.
Okay, so
because the foundation
of Obamacare and the healthcare thing is a perfect example of that. What you end up at the end of a thing is this compromised version And
Gotcha.
so I do think there's some, in order for some of that stuff to work, there needs to be some foundational shifts that are going to upend a lot of, the country in a bad way. Like, I don't think it's possible to do it any other way. Whole industries are going to get upended or shifted or whatever in order to shift this whole system to a way that is kind of fits the way that it can work successfully.
Sure.
And I'm not arguing that should happen, right?
Right.
Like I don't know what the answer is other than that we keep working on it and seeing where our current system is failing and try and augment those things. But I mean, I just feel like,
would you, and here again, I'm going to kind of shift it away from healthcare. Not that we can't, stay there as far as that goes, but I'm trying to think of other areas that would basically kind of affirm what you're saying in this process. But, and I think of fuels or energy.
okay.
As far as, our fossil fuel reliance, if you will, that could be another, and now we're bringing, electric cars into the dynamic. We're bringing, windmills online, all these things that are costing or have a price tag associated with them, photovoltaics as far as, solar cells and that kind of thing, versus, and I kind of think of that in some ways as, this process of trying to shift a foundational reliance on, fossil fuel as far as, gasoline and, that kind of thing as we know it.
Yeah.
And I think, that even what we might call the green dynamic, or what was the other lady that had the green, she wanted to shut down. Oh, shucks. She was like shutting down all the old antiquated government buildings. I can't think of her name.
When you said green, I thought of Ralph Nader. I don't think that's what you're talking about.
He's the Green Party. But you say, oh, shucks. But it's okay. It was a lady here just recently.
Interesting. Yeah.
Was talking about, But I think about it in that context of being able, this desire to completely change.
Yeah.
And granted, I'm not opposed to supplemental things but I'm going to look at that from my capitalistic perspective and say, okay, is it beneficial long term? Are we really, or are we just propping up
just trading one problem in our world for another?
Yeah. Or and are we propping up one system, like electric cars, if I may say. Is the government coming in to produce electric cars, but yet this isn't really feasible for a long-term solution to offset our reliance, that kind of thing. That's, because that's a waste to me.
Yeah.
From that perspective. Not that I'm not willing to look for alternatives. And I think there are some alternatives that are actually feasible, but for some reason, we don't always consider them.
Yeah. It's also about funding, right? I think what you're saying is the government's thrown its weight behind electric cars and that kind of thing. Therefore, that's where the funding is. That's where the investment goes, because it's like, well, if you're successful, then we can get government backing, and that's part of our success metric, right?
Right.
So yeah, I think part of the issue with us not having other alternatives has to do with the focus of the
and I think
the weight of
and I think at times the government will prop up a dynamic that left to its own market in a capitalistic, it would fail otherwise. Yeah. Because unless the government threw that money in that, the average investor is saying, no, that's not going to work.
Make it,
That's not going to make it.
Survival of the fittest, and that's not the fittest.
Right.
Yeah. No, I agree.
And that's where, that's the other part of it. I think that, puts a negative taste, because what it does from my perspective, it's like now the person who's just trying to mow lawns and put, gasoline in their lawnmower to get lawn mows now has to pay a higher fuel price or something, just because we've kind of made that market a little more volatile.
Yeah.
And now it fluctuates. It goes up, because we've, created, and I'm not saying, but I think so often as with a government dynamic, it's when we've thrown this weight behind it that it kind of shifts versus allowing something to build in such a way that says, okay, yeah, this is a viable alternative.
Yeah. And that's the hard thing is like we do expect our government to do that sometimes where naturally things won't occur,
Sure.
I did. Yeah.
Well, I think, propping up the housing market here just recently, I think from what I hear from other people, bankers, that kind of thing, that was a necessary thing for the government to come in and do. Now, whether it was necessary to prop up some of the automotive, years ago.
Yeah, protect them from the natural ends that were coming at them. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, the bankruptcies and all that.
The bankruptcies, where, what was it? Who was it? Chrysler that didn't take one, and they saw a big bump in there.
It was Ford.
Was it Ford? Okay.
Because I just listened
Chrysler
to
and GM
podcast episode where Ford's CEO was on it. Interesting dude.
Oh, neat.
Yeah, he was talking about that. Yeah.
Yeah, because I just recently saw their advertising that talks about how many things they produce in the U.S. too. I know Ford is definitely, but yeah. So I think about that in that, and granted, fossil fuels or energy is one more of those dynamics that I see, where it kind of comes back to what you're saying. It would take a fundamental shift, to do some of these things, but I think, Yeah. Can you think of another market? Housing, and automotive, we kind of talked about, but where you see that dynamic between democratic socialism and capitalism kind of desiring to morph one that is basically a foundational dynamic that we've become used to?
I don't know, but I think I don't know if I have an answer to that question.
Yeah, that's okay. Go ahead with yours.
Well, I was just thinking about how this is. I don't know a ton about it, but I'm pretty sure the government controls the electric grid, right?
I hear you.
To a large degree. Is
I
that
got you.
right?
It makes sense. Yep.
And again, why'd we draw the line there, right?
Okay.
To say they should have control over that. Well, I think in a lot of ways it's kind of feels obvious. If one part of the grid goes down, it could impact whatever. I don't know, stability, whatever.
Right.
Why don't they then? Why aren't they in charge of internet? Right. In other words, we're drawing lines everywhere and saying this is where the government's involved. This is where it's not. Right.
Sure.
I think we get very hung up on, but they can't touch that because that turns us into socialism or whatever. It's like, well, why is that the thing?
I hear you.
It's typically when the thing is something that is clearly for social good, right? Like this idea of
I gotcha.
The idea of a social benefit, right?
Sure.
Healthcare.
Or how I see what would be a social good versus what is currently in place.
Right. Because we don't think of roads or the electric, grid. That whole thing is for social good. It's more ground level than that, right?
Yeah.
I don't know. It's just interesting how we.
Well, it's interesting that you think about it. I mean, there's that part of us that could say, if we have a federal government over top of this electrical, we're able to balance out and make up for other states, if you will, that don't have all of the ability to produce energy like some states that might. You follow me?
Yeah.
I'm just, and here again, nothing against anybody, but you take a state like Texas that has, sun most states, southern states, let's put it that way, who have sun most of the year versus northeastern states that might not be able to take advantage of photocells and those kind of things. Whereas, some places might have more wind options, or hydroelectric dams where, you can generate energy. And I can understand from a governmental perspective, okay, those places that can, almost have the ability. I won't necessarily.
The mandate.
Yeah, the mandate to provide for others that can't.
Yeah.
And I can understand that.
But that's working for us. So
Sure.
It's easy to kind of go, yeah, but that one's necessary because look, it's you see how it's necessary. It's basically kind of, I'm not saying this is what you're doing, but it's like that can become circular reasoning of like, well, it's necessary because it's working because it's necessary.
I got you.
It's like, therefore, it's not the same as healthcare, for instance.
Right.
Again, we don't know if that was fundamentally shifted to be more, at the very low levels, government, whatever, right?
Sure.
Again, the shift that it would take, I can't even fathom. But, I'm curious if it'd be interesting to know, which I don't think we can know, if the way that the government handles the power grid has stifled innovation in that area in the U.S. Like with these areas where the government is very involved in fundamental in the way the thing works. It'd be interesting to know if that has stifled innovation, because that is one of the big arguments, and I would imagine so, probably. Well, but we kind of say that's worth that, right?
Right.
The stability.
And I want to say, based on where we are and the fact that, the energy, plant is right over there. Yeah. We know a number of people who would, argue that probably nuclear is the cheapest way to produce, but yet it has a unsavory, flavor to it for the,
It gets bad press when they blow up.
and they cost a good bit to produce, to put the safeguards in place from a governmental standpoint. It's not like you can just put a nuclear reactor in your backyard, with no oversight.
Yeah.
But it is interesting when we think about it in that, stepping over or what it costs to do something, versus, what might seem more palatable, but may not necessarily be as efficient.
Right. Or cause other problems that are equally as distasteful, of impacting the world.
Sure.
What's the word? The environment. But we don't see those yet, or it's not as clear, or maybe it's not as eventful,
or maybe they just don't make the media type dynamic.
That's what I mean. Like so like what was that? A tsunami or whatever hit Japan, and that's what caused that nuclear plant to get submerged, and they didn't have the protocols in place for that type of event, and that's why it was a really bad thing. But it's like that's one big huge event media can all jump on and point to, but like the birds all dying because of the windmills,
right?
It's not one single event we can point to and all jump on the news cycle at once, and therefore now we have a villain we can point to. And I feel like that's part of nuclear's problem, right? Is when they go bad, everybody knows them in those situations. But overall, again, based on information from friends of ours that work there, like nuclear is one of the better ways to go in terms of impact on the government. And you think, but it produces nuclear waste. Well, they all produce some sort of waste, and they all have
there's ways to
their negative
deal
impacts.
with that.
But we just have this idea of the villainy of a nuclear plant, right?
Yep.
And so it's gone out of favor. We haven't built very many new nuclear plants in the last 50 years because of that. Because we are a government by the people for the most part. So, like, our representatives aren't going to allow new nuclear. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Who wants it in their state or their backyard? Yeah.
Yeah, that kind of thing. Yes.
Yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah. And it's interesting that, as I think about, just being able to have this conversation to allow, kind of pull my personal biases and viewpoints back, I think it's interesting because I think at the heart of some of this is our desire, or it reflects a desire for change.
Yeah.
And how difficult that can be.
Yeah.
Especially the more, beneficial that I see something being to me.
Yeah. The way it is.
Yeah.
Or
if it's benefiting me currently, I probably have very little desire for it to change.
Yeah. That's normal.
Exactly. That's human nature.
Yeah.
And yet, if you will, our ability, and I think this is where the two come into conflict. And I think, as I'm kind of wrestling with this, as the two come into conflict, it's not everything has to always be about me.
Yeah.
And I can basically allow myself to be able to say, okay, is there a way that I can help someone else in that process, even if it might inhibit me a little bit?
Yeah.
Or maybe even a lot if necessary,
The greater good kind of thing.
Yeah.
That's hard to do that. It's interesting, we talk about second order thinking before. The Chesterton's Fence episode is this idea that, well, we can make this change now and it has these first order consequences, but what are the second order?
Sure.
And I would say both, on every side of a polarizing argument, people are pretty good about second order thinking the consequences of the thing they don't want.
Oh, sure.
Right? Like,
no, I hear you.
And like, that's where you get all your talking points, and that's where people get really like, yeah, that's bad, because if that happens, then that will happen, which means that will happen.
Yeah.
But they're not willing to do the same homework on the status quo.
Sure.
If we stay here, what are the consequences to that? What are the second order consequences? What are the second order consequences we're currently entrenched in as a result of this status quo?
Sure.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And of course, both sides are good at kind of flinging that mud and saying, your second order consequences look like this,
Exactly.
Like, yeah, but yours look like this. And I don't know, I thought that was, it just sprung to my mind, like how good we are about kind of really doing our homework and, listen to podcasts, whatever, the news, and going, yeah, that's right. If electric cars, and that will happen, and which means that will happen, and instead of going, but if fossil fuels, then this is happening because of that. It's like, yeah, but I'll take the devil I know,
I hear you. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. No, I definitely, and I think that can go so much further in our lives in some ways than just the topics of capitalism and socialism.
So true. Yeah.
That kind of thing, as we,
there's a term for government controlled by the companies. Have you heard that term or that argument or that thing?
No, but I'd be curious to know.
Well, it's not. This isn't the one I remember, but I did Google it. It's corporate.
Easy for you to say.
Corporatocracy.
Okay. Can you say that one more time?
No, I can't. I probably
can't. Corporatocracy.
Yeah. But that's not. What's an oligarchy? Do you know what that is? That's the word that I thought.
I know of the word.
Okay. Well, oligarchy is the one I was thinking of, and it's a small group of people having control of a country, organization, or institution. Basically, there's been one of the arguments on the democratic socialism side is that capitalism has produced an oligarchy. In other words, the big corporations have the ability to lobby more than you do, Mark, for your little farm, right? So
I gotcha.
Therefore, the government is mostly, and then also funding, right?
Sure. I hear where you're coming from.
Yeah. So ultimately, the people with the most money, aka corporations, end up having the most control, and therefore we are an oligarchy because a small group of people run the government. It's not by the people. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I definitely understand.
So that's a pretty, that's a significant kind of viewpoint or stance that I think a lot of people on the pushing for democratic socialism is kind of a war cry. There's like, well, the way it is, the way capitalism has produced an oligarchy, you think the government is for you, but they're not. They're for Exxon. You know what I mean?
Gotcha.
And Apple or whatever. Like the people who have the money to pay their way to the top.
Right.
And
well, kind of like we talk about big pharma in the medical industry.
Yes, and big pharma, exactly. Yeah. So there's a reason why we've had this opioid epidemic in the U.S. It's because of the lobbying for these drugs are good, right? By people with lots of money, pushing into the government system and therefore causing politicians to get voted in who are then going to vote for, we need to allow these drugs or whatever. And then wouldn't you know it, second order consequences, people are dying. Right? Yeah. You know what I'm saying?
No, I hear where you're coming from.
But these big pharma companies are doing mighty good as a result of all these deaths.
Sure.
right?
No, I hear where you're coming from.
Financially, they're doing pretty good, and the investors are therefore doing pretty good.
Yep.
Right?
No, I hear where you're coming from. Yeah.
It's kind of an interesting... and I'm not of those mindset that, well, if we adopt this other thing, it will fix it all.
Sure.
I don't think that's true at all. I think they're...
Justin wants to go back to shrooms for medication.
That's right. Hey, if that works, whatever Mary Beth says. That's I don't know. I just feel like we live in a broken world, and so therefore, and also entropy is one of the laws of physics, right?
Sure.
So everything goes from basically devolves into chaos, right? So
sure.
From organization to chaos is the natural direction of things. So we started the government with we hold these truths to be self-evident, and created this very specific type of government that was very intentional and very defined and very principled, right?
Sure.
And I feel like entropy has kind of taken over in the last 200 some years to where it's a decaf version of it, right?
I gotcha.
And it's not the same government as it was then.
Yeah.
It can't be for many reasons, right? But also just the law of physics says, anything that's organized is going to devolve into something less organized and more chaotic. And that's a physical thing. That's a law of physics, but you see it at work in general, right? Because I think that's the law of sin nature more than anything.
Yeah, and I think that's where of course, where my mind was going is that organizing factor of in God we trust type thing.
Yeah.
I think that's, that tends, our God, if you will, small g, tends to shift, can shift with a capitalistic view or even a socialistic view. And it's like, okay, what does big G God, have to say about this? And as we desire to forget about him and, we tend to, our sin nature is going to tend to, well, it's all about me.
Yeah.
Whereas at times I need to be reflecting on, okay, how is my need being met, benefiting others or hurting others as well?
Yeah. You made me think of recovery, higher power. So that's a concept that's in almost every recovery plan.
Sure.
And even like in AA, whatever, they say the higher power can be whatever you want, but you need to have one.
Sure.
Right? It's this idea that there's something above you that's more important.
Sure.
And that you're willing to listen to over your own impulses.
Sure.
Right?
Yeah.
Which is very much kind of what you're saying with In God We Trust, I do believe was very much intended to provide that sort of perspective for as a government to say, ultimately, we operate under a higher authority. We've talked about this before too, right?
Sure.
We operate under higher authority. So if it's something we want, but it disagrees with that higher authority, we don't do it.
Sure.
Right?
Yeah.
And like you said, we've kind of tried to get that idea out because we are our own higher authority, but
we know better.
We're selfish and we're petty and we're, every addict will tell you, I need a higher power because on my own,
Yep.
any addict who's worked through some recovery goes, that higher power is crucial to it. And again, one of the podcasts I listen to, he is an absolute atheist, and he is in Alcoholics Anonymous, and he's not very anonymous about it, but higher power is something that he talks about a lot, how it's important for him to just give up control and recognize that, but he's an atheist.
Sure.
Right? So there is something to this pulling ourselves out of our base nature and like what we think we need and want. Basically what you were saying about, what I want personally.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah.
So if we don't trust in God, if it's not in God we trust, and it's in me we trust, and God help us. Right?
Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. Well, I think that's where we're at for today.
That's right.
This is Capitalism and Socialism revised.
Yes.
So, yes.
The half-cap versions.
The half-cap versions. This is how we see it.
Hey, thank you for listening to our podcast. If you like How I See It, please do all the things that podcasts tell you to do. Subscribe, rate, review, follow us, and or talk nicely about us on social media. If you want to reach out, the email is us@howiseeit.click. Yep, I said .click, as in .click. Please tell your friends about this show, and we'll see you on the next one.